let's start since it's 4 minutes after 3. So welcome everybody. So I'm going to, in the agenda, I'm just going to reverse the 2 items. So in case, Catherine, do you go by, is it Kath or Kathy?
It's Kathy.
How do you
it's a weird spelling. It's a weird spelling, Kathy.
Okay, so it's K-A-T-H-E, but you pronounce it Kathy.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, in case Kathy, if you need to leave after you talk, so I'm just going to have you go first. You're definitely welcome to stay, of course. And so I'm going to move the first item to second, where we're just going to be talking about, wrapping up from the winter meeting. So today we have KToddBrown from Pacific Northwest National Lab, and she's going to talk to us about the International Soil Carbon Network, and specifically this carbon data recovery harmonization repository, which sounds really interesting. So I think I'm just going to.
I've made Kathy the presenter. There she goes.
Okay,
She just
so good.
use it.
So
I can see, Kathy, I can see it now.
You have the control now. Can just let you start.
Fantastic. So thank you for inviting me to come and talk. And I'm really excited to talk about something that I've been working on for almost a year now, the Soil Organic Carbon Data Rescue and Harmonization Repository, or SOC-DRaHR, for the International Soil Carbon Network. And let's see, I haven't tried this. There we go. All right, so the International Soil Carbon Network is a collection of researchers who got together to try to leverage large-scale synthesis studies to inform soil carbon understanding, sort of motivated around three themes: sort of identifying big data questions. So what are the most appropriate applications for all of this data that we suddenly find ourselves drowning in? Developing common vocabulary around soil measurements. There was a lot of efforts in the first couple of years around developing templates and what sort of standard measurements for soil surveys internationally would be and how they could be harmonized. And then 3, the actual harmonization of soil data, predominantly from surveys, although we're looking to expand into experimental manipulations, both field and laboratory scale. So ISCN is both a network and a data product, so that's sometimes a little confusing for people. So it refers both to this sort of grassroots network around mostly academic researchers, and there's also delivered data products. We're currently on version 3. ISCN 4 should be coming out this year. And one of the things that the ISCN sort of efforts were built to address was the fact that there's sort of lots of data now in repositories online, but they're hard to use. So one of the things that we're standing up this year is a community open source software project that both identifies data sets of interests, sorry about the notifications, and aggregates a collection of scripts to harmonize the data. So this next iteration of SOC-DRaHR is going to be focused on the aggregation scripts as opposed to generating a templated data product. So what exactly does that mean? The traditional meta-analysis pipeline from the creator perspective goes something along these lines. We create a template, we give the template to data providers, we say, fill out this template for us. And then we take the template, we merge these templates, often copying, pasting in Excel and creating these big long spreadsheets. And then we analyze the resulting database. Now, from a data provider perspective, what they generally see is this very large list of variables that they have to go through, and they have to understand how those variables map to the data that they've collected. And inevitably, they find something, they have a field for data that they've collected that is not in the spreadsheet. So either that data is lost now in the final data product, or you start getting scope creep in the database, where it slowly gets larger and larger and exacerbates the first hurdle for these data providers. So there's a lot of onus on the data provider in this sort of traditional pipeline to make their data, to harmonize their data. The onus is on the provider and not on the meta-analysis team themselves. So we're looking to flip this a little bit and sort of identify these two different responsibilities that the data providers have versus the data users. The data providers are responsible for preservation and access. Essentially, this is putting things on an online public archive. There are a couple of them in our field that I'm sure you're aware of that are usable or that are commonly used and accessible. And then from a data user or a meta-analysis perspective, we're responsible for preserving provenance and reproducibility. And then sort of something that both the data providers and the users are responsible for is this accurate interpretation of their data. Feel free to break in if you've got any questions or want me to elaborate on anything here. So the traditional pipeline of filling out templates and passing Excel spreadsheets around breaks provenance and reproducibility in a lot of ways. Yes, another analysis could go back to the original data providers and say, hey, fill out this spreadsheet again. But that's not readily reproducible. So SOC-DRaHR is going to take a more of a scripted approach, where we're going to take a set of public data sets that are already registered with a DOI, write ingestion scripts unique to each of those data sets. So we're not creating the general data vacuum that will suck up any and all data sets. Each of these ingestion scripts have to be custom created and uniquely linked to the individual data sets. So these ingestion scripts will translate the data sets from whatever format they were provided in their original DOI to this sort of general data table format. And we've identified 5 data tables, one describing the studies themselves, the second one describing site level descriptions. So we're biome, landscape descriptors, mean annual temperature, things along those lines. The third one describing any treatments that were applied to the soil, and we're considering things like fractionation methods to be a treatment. So anything that you did to manipulate your soil before you took a measurement. A fourth table describes the protocols. So how did you measure bulk density? Did you sieve the soil before you quantified bulk density, or did you not sieve the soil? Was it measured at a specific moisture content? And then finally, the measurements themselves. And these data tables are a combination of wide and long data formats, if you're familiar with those, and all have a sort of a common vocabulary that is assigned in your ingestion scripts. From this general data table, we can now write up general QA/QC scripts, making sure that we don't have a pH measurement that was 80,000 because someone forgot to put in a decimal point. And then finally, formatting scripts that will create the finalized harmonized data product. So this is a very similar approach that's been taken by some other groups, sort of independently arrived at. The Environmental Data Initiative, it's NSF funded. They've got a slightly different generalized set of data tables because they're working with they're not working with soils data, they're working with plant survey data mostly. But this idea is generating a lot of excitement. So there are sort of 4 key elements here. There's the identification of the data sets of interest. There's the data ingestion scripts. There's the QA/QC scripts, and then there's the formatting scripts. So we welcome contributors at sort of any level of this. So if you have a data set that you think other people would be interested in, you can register it with us. And if someone conducting a meta-analysis thinks that your script is interesting, thinks that your data set is interesting, they can go in and script it up. Or you could write the data ingestion script yourself, and that would further lower the barrier for inclusion of the data into data products. ISCN is going to periodically archive the data products. Like I said, we've got ISCN 4 should be coming out this year as data permissions allow. So because SOC-DRaHR is focused on the scripts themselves and not hosting the data, the custody of the data is still with the original data providers in this case. So some of those reuse permissions are more restrictive than others. And what gets into the ISCN data product is going to depend on those permissions.
Hey, Kathy, this is Bill. Just a quick question on the DOI. So that's a different one from the original. Right? It's the same data set, but once it has gone through your process 1, 2, 3, 4, it's a different data set and therefore different DOI.
So the DOI is actually on the repository itself. So the scripts in that data table are what we're assigning this DOI to. The ISCN will assign another DOI to the final data product, and that is going to that will be dependent on the data permissions. But SOC-DRaHR itself is just those scripts and the meta information about the data sets.
Oh, okay. So the DOI you mentioned here is related to these 4 items.
Exactly.
Right.
So you'll notice that there is no data on those 4 items. We're trying to sidestep a little bit the data permissions issue by just sort of enabling access to the data and as opposed to hosting the data itself.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, so this sort of looks at data scripting as sort of washing glassware. So the mechanics of it are not really computationally challenging, but you are required to have domain knowledge. So just like if you're going to go acid wash glassware, the mechanics of it are very, very sort of straightforward, but when you choose to use an acid wash versus a regular detergent requires knowledge about what you're going to be using that glassware for. So this is an excellent opportunity for domain scientists like those who are in the lab sieving soils right now to pick up new skills around data management. The software being developed here is in R, and that's useful for both data visualization in general as well as incorporating your data into future data products.
I'm going to interrupt just Kathy. Can I interrupt you for just a second? I just want to tell Bar that I've muted you. If you have a question that you want to ask, Bar, I'll unmute you so that you can ask a question if you want to. Will that work?
Thank you, Nancy. Yeah, did I unmute?
You are on. You're on now. You're on now. If you want.
Oh, excellent.
To be. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and I actually realized how to do it from my phone, so I think I can take care of it from from now on.
Okay.
One question I had, which maybe so I'm not able to see if you have slides if maybe you'll get to this, or maybe you showed the kind of variables that you're looking at. So I'm Lindsay Barberi, or I go by Bar, and I'm a member of ESIP, but I'm also doing my own sort of stab at biogeochemistry and doing some soil science at the moment. But what we're really looking at is greenhouse gas emissions from soils, and I didn't know if that featured into the kinds of variables you were looking at, or just the soil carbon content of the soil?
So right now, ISCN has been more focused on soil survey data, and my other hat is a computational biogeochemist, so I make computer models of carbon cycling. So I'm very interested in incorporating greenhouse gas emissions into the ISCN sort of variable list. It's not in there right now. We're more focused on things like bulk density, percent carbon, loss on ignition, different phosphorus measurements, nitrogen percentage, cation exchange, sort of very traditional shovel science quantifications. That being said, we are set up to take in variables that are not formally on our variable list. So I've tried to be very conscious of trying to keep that framework very flexible with a long table data format. And what the plan is that we will take all of the new variables that are submitted into the repository and list those as candidate variables, and sort of that the next all hands meeting will ratify new variables as they are of interest to the community and try to standardize it that way. So your answer is we don't have it yet, but we want them.
That's great to hear. And I also was curious if everybody can still hear me. I hope it's not too distracting. Are you working much with like other initiatives? I guess again I missed any slides that maybe connected your work to sort of the broader, but like folks like the Global Research Alliance or GraceNet, or like I'm trying to think of other institutions or groups that might be looking at soil data.
Right. So right now we've been talking mostly with the LTER sites and NEON, but what else? We would welcome other initiatives as well. So that was part of my goal for talking with folks here, is to make sure that we're tied in with other initiatives that are going on around soil data. The EDI, the Environmental Data Initiative, I talked with them a week or two ago, and it was really exciting to hear that they've got a very similar pipeline set up for their metadata products that they're looking at standing up. But no, some of those I was not aware of, so yay.
Yeah, great. Well, I'd love to think more about this and maybe follow up. So yeah, thank you.
Fantastic.
Kathy, this is Brian Wee. I was formerly from NEON. One question about your variable list is, are you, to what extent is there a naming convention that you are applying for your variable list? And follow-on question is, if there is a naming convention, are you consulting ontologies that are like developed by NASA, who might have those terms already defined and named in a specific format, so that you are harmonized and interoperable with other data sets that use those ontologies?
Right. So right now we're using an ontology that was developed by ISCN. So it's not. I actually don't know the history of it, but I believe that it was not tied to any of the more formal ontology networks that have been developed. That being said, we're using sort of a mapping schema, and so we can map once we understand what each of those variable names mean, we can assign that mapping and can either output to specific ontologies or read in from specific ontologies fairly readily. So that's one of the flexibilities that we're trying to engineer into the repository.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, actually that's useful about your mention about mapping between different ontologies, because I mean, I personally believe that's the right way to go. Well, either you adopt one that's commonly used, but you guys seem to be large enough that if you're comfortable with your ontology, then it is very natural and very okay. And I've seen this in other places to just create mappings, and that's a wonderful way to go. Thanks.
Right. One of the things that we want to do moving forward is we've been focused mostly on large survey data sets. And I would like to see us move more towards single PI, more experimental data sets, and try to sweep in that kind of long tail of data that's out there. So individual PIs may not even be aware of the standard ontologies or really see the need to use them in their study. But if we can maintain a flexibility of, okay, for this study, this is the mapping from the variable names that they used, and this is where it maps onto our variable names. So that's one thing that we're trying to preserve here. All right, so if there aren't any other questions, I just wanted to hit where SOC-DRaHR is currently. So right now we've been trying to hook into the broader community and make sure that this is interesting to soil scientists and that we're serving the needs of the community, and we've gotten a lot of really good feedback at AGU and other conferences. We've got 20 data sets that are currently identified for data ingestion, and 4 of those data scripts are currently written, mostly focused on the data that was queued up for ISCN 4 that uses the previous templated pipeline. We've got a general keyed ingestion script developed, and we just hosted our first hackathon in December 2017, which was very exciting, getting a whole bunch of soil scientists and our experts in the same room together to try to work on data was a learning experience. In the future, we want to sort of finalize the format script for ISCN 4. We've got our first DOI release for the scripts, hopefully in the summer of 2018. We're continuing to identify potential new data products. So if you have a meta-analysis that you would like to build a data product for, we would be very interested in talking with you. We're looking to develop guides and documentation so that we can develop a body of educational material to enable maybe grad students or postdocs who don't have a background in data science to contribute to the repository code. And we've got a second hackathon set for May 2018 at Texas A&M. And I've got links to the 2 repositories that were just transferred over to just transferred out of my personal repository and into an organizational repository this morning. The old links should work, but they're on GitHub for those of you who can't see. And SOC-DRaHR is the primary repository, and then SoilsDRaHR is an R supporting package that has a lot of the scripts in it. And with that, I'm going to again say that we would welcome any contributions. If either you had a data set you think should be identified, or we're interested in writing scripts or documentation or hosting a hackathon, please get in touch with me. My email addresses, my GitHub account, and my Twitter handle are on this slide that I can pass over to folks if they're interested and can't see it right now. The ISCN co-chairs are Gustav Fidelis at Stockholm, and Jennifer Harden, who's currently a fellow at Stanford, previously with USGS. And my co-coordinator is Avni Malhara at ORNL, and some Ben von Lamberdy, Rose Abramoff, and Julie Lucelle have been contributing to the repository. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
This is just one little logistics. Kathy, can we get your slides and share them with people if that
Yep.
Okay, that'd be great. You can send them to me later if you want to. Thank you.
Kathy, hi, this is Bar again. I had a quick question. Hi. Are you aware of, or do you have any connections with the Research Data Alliance at all? I'm just curious.
No, I have not heard of the Research Data Alliance.
Oh, Alliance, yeah. Okay, yeah, I'm not positive that would be necessarily the most useful direction, but I was just curious if you had them on your radar. But
yeah, there are a lot of these new data initiatives and organizations that are coming online. So it's sometimes hard to keep track of them all.
Yeah, definitely. But is your scope mostly primarily in the United States, or is it global?
It is global. Our highest density of data is currently in the U.S., but we do have data from around the globe.
Okay, great.
And similarly, Kathy, are you familiar with the LTAR network? That's USDA.
No.
It's similar to LTER or NEON. It's the Long-Term Agroecological Research Network. They're based here in Maryland, and they also have a data system and sampling sites around the country. So that's something I'm sure they'll be interested to hear about your work as well, if they don't know already.
Great. I know we've had some USDA scientists at our hackathon and in the ISCN, but I have not heard of LTAR yet.
Okay, great.
Hi, this is Nick. I'm working with the LTAR.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is Nick.
I'm in Mandan, North Dakota.
I'm
in Mandan, North Dakota, ARS, USDA ARS.
Okay, but this is Nick, right?
Yep.
Okay. But I did say that.
No, because we're not aware of this.
You weren't aware of this soil work, you mean? Is that what you're saying, Nick?
No, I'm not a soil scientist, but my supervisor is, and he cannot make it to the meeting, and so I was curious about it, and so.
Yeah, I did send a note to Jeff Campbell of LTAR here of this talk, so yeah, he probably tied up, but I'll catch up with him afterwards just to tell him that there's the presentation available. He can check up on it afterwards. So I have a question about this goes way, I think one of the first slides. If I heard this correctly, you said something about if you were to offer templates to the data producer, that it's hard for the subsequent harmonization. I'm not sure if I got that correctly. If that's the case, I'm wondering why would it be harder to harmonize if you provide templates for all the producers to fill in?
So it's not harder to harmonize. It's much easier to harmonize because you either just write one script or you copy and paste.
Right.
You preserve the template structure, but it's much harder for the data providers. It's a larger hurdle. So if you've already published your paper and you've deposited your data in a repository, now you've got someone who's handed you this generally what is a very large template for you to populate. And talking with researchers, that's oftentimes a hurdle for them to contribute their data to a meta-analysis.
Yeah, because the work, for harmonization, the work has to be done one end or the other. Right? So I guess this decision that you've made is that to maximize the number of people contributing, it'd be better if you your side take on that work, so that they'll be much easier for them to just provide the data. Right.
So what I've seen a lot of from the templated structure is it's very hard to preserve data provenance. So you'll have a piece of data and maybe you need to iterate with the data provider about the unit conversion or the formatting for something. And that iteration is difficult to document. If it's done sort of point and click, fill in Excel templates style. Whereas if the data provider had has archived their data, has a DOI with what they feel is explanatory meta information, you can write a script that will point directly to that repository, and then you script out what unit conversions or other considerations in that code. So that's sort of a self-documenting document right there. The code can be self-documenting essentially. So you preserve data provenance.
I've got a question. Do you know what platform is being used to enter the data? Like
typically Excel.
Pardon me?
Typically Excel. So most of the files that we've worked with were Excel files or CSV files.
Okay, so is it like an open source, like an S3 or something else?
So we don't host any data here.
Okay.
So the scripts that we're working with are R scripts. The data that we've been identifying are on DRaHR or Pangea or the LTER data repository sites.
Okay.
And so the data that's archived there is typically in Excel or a flat CSV format.
Okay. Thank you.
So we've got R hooks that will read in Excel documents, and I mean clearly a CSV document is trivial to read in any scripting language.
Right.
So eventually we are going to need to change our internal representation over to probably SQL or some kind of relational database table. Right now it's being read in as an internal R data frame. But things are starting to get a little large, so we're at the point where we're going to need to change that back end. But because we're isolating the data ingestion and the outputs in this way, we can swap out the back end without too much trouble. So.
Thanks.
Bill, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on the provenance, what you mentioned about that. So you can point to the data producer and write their DOI. So whatever information they provided on the provenance of how they ended up with that particular data set. But then from that point on to, let's say, make it into the ISCN archive, where there's another segment of provenance, right? So is it like two pieces of this? That if someone wants to trace the entire thing, you have to go through your provenance and then point to the data producer's provenance.
Yes, yeah. So if you're looking at so there are sort of two ways that you can use you can use SOC-DRaHR and ISCN. You can either use the final harmonized data product, which has its own DOI. And in that DOI is information about the study that the sample was associated with in that data table. So you can trace it that way, or you can download the repository from GitHub and use the repository to access those data sets individually. So there are sort of two alternate ways to use SOC-DRaHR. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
I had a question too, Kathy. I know you mentioned at the end, towards the end of your presentation, that one of the goals of the project is also to provide some educational materials, guides, that sort of thing, targeted to data scientists. What's your timeline for that? Are you and are you thinking of those kinds of resources as something that could be It's pretty much focused on soil, people working with soil probably. But so could you talk a little bit more about what you're envisioning there?
Yeah, so I was thinking something along the lines of the software and data carpentry lessons that are currently available. Only making something specifically focused towards soil, so tailoring it to soil needs, and also tailoring it to how do you write a key so that you can map the variable names that you used in your study to the variable name, the ISCN variable names or other variable names, things along those lines, and walking researchers through that. So I'm developing some of this material for the hackathons that we've been hosting, and all of the resources for the hackathons are posted on the SOC-DRaHR or the SOC-DRaHR repository, the GitHub repository, and you're welcome to go check that out.
Yeah, the reason
it is nowhere near that aspirational target right now.
Yeah.
And we've also been trying to sort of stick to best practices for developing a community open source project. So there's some additional documentation on the SOC-DRaHR repository that we're hoping will eventually morph into something a little bit more user-friendly than what it is right now.
Okay, great. Yeah, one of the reasons I'm asking is because I working closely with a registry for those kinds of educational materials, and so we really love to make that kind of thing available when you're ready to publish it, quote unquote, to your own community. So hopefully keep in touch on that. It'd be great.
I would love to talk with you more to find more best practices around developing those educational materials.
Sure. Yeah, I'll follow up with you then. That sounds good.
Thank you.
Yeah, and also Jennifer Carter, I'm going to just say your question, Jennifer, because I don't know the answer to it, asked what language you are using for your scripts. Python or?
R. We're using R.
Right. That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure.
So, yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so it was a choice between Python and R is more common in the in my immediate community, so that's what we went with. But you're absolutely right; it could have been just as easily Python.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Kathy, Brian, this is Brian here again. One question about your use of the term provenance, and actually Bill had also used the term provenance in his questions about the provenance within ISCN and the provenance captured that might come from external providers. But when you say provenance in that context, I sense that you are using the term provenance in the sense that when you have a piece of R code and somebody's reading through the R code, the provenance is documented as code, in the code itself, right? That's one form of provenance. But so the question is, when you talk about provenance, are you talking about that kind of provenance in the code, or are you talking about a separate external file that is serialized, like for example, in XML or some other format that is concordant with like a W3C provenance schema, so that because the W3C guys have a schema for encoding provenance data in a way that you can exchange that provenance data between providers. So is it A or B? What was it when you talk about provenance? Was it more in terms of a code, or was it more in terms of that external file that is encoded using a W3C prof compliance standard?
It's more the first.
Okay.
So you're absolutely correct that it is more code than XML compliant at this point. We would like to eventually get there, but this was, I see this as a stepwise improvement from passing around templates right now. So you're right. We could do better with the provenance and make it more sort of schema compatible, but we're not there right now.
And personally, I think it's okay because seriously. I don't think too many people do that right now. I mean, the XML. I mean, the W3C prof compliant, representation, either XML or some other serialized format. But yeah, I don't think anybody. I don't know, Bill. Do you know any of your NASA compatriots do that for the NASA data products?
Do what?
Do they capture the provenance of like NASA data products? Like level 4, level 3 data products. Do they capture that provenance in a separate file? Let's just call it a separate file. Like a separate file which is encoded in some format. I don't know. XML comes to mind, but there are other ways.
Yeah, you mean like package into the actual file the whole history of it.
Yeah, like which is compliant.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, there are pieces of it. So in many of these files that we distribute, for example, there are input pointers. So the information about what files went into the input of this output file, that information often is in the file itself, the metadata of the file. But what you're talking about, I don't think it's. I'm not sure, but I don't think it's it will be that complete. But in some of the tools that we have, like our visualization tool online, we do provide the user when they go through our tool to generate a plot, for example, then they can see what we actually did, starting with the input file, and then whatever processes that they requested to be applied to the input file to get the output plot, then that whole provenance is presented to them, so they can go back to any of the intermediate steps to see what those outputs were.
This is Nancy again. There was one other question coming through on the chat. Will your metadata, Kathy, be compliant with ISO 19115, or are you, what metadata scheme are you using for your process?
So right now we are not. So the metadata for the identifying of the data tables is currently literally a table.
Right.
No, it's a markdown document.
Okay.
So that's currently how what we've got worked up right now, because we have a relatively small number of data sets identified. That works fairly well for us.
Yeah.
Eventually we're going to have to move to something else. What'll probably an internal data frame in R is what we're going to first move to, and then move to something else. As far as the metadata, I'm not. So the ISCN 3 is a set of 4 Excel files. And there's a tab for what's the format? I'm trying to remember in my head. There is a tab for study information that has any references for the data that the data providers requested in there. And so that is currently how metadata is dealt with. Okay, so
kind of for appropriate use, or it doesn't seem as if ISO 19115 may necessarily work with what you're doing, but because you're also, I mean, that's more for data sets. It seems like some Jennifer should jump in here if she has a different opinion about that, but yeah, so that makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
But going back to data, doesn't the, I mean, I don't know much about this, but IGSN, I mean, they have a schema for capturing soil sample data, and I don't know whether the International Soil Carbon Network uses any of that work that they have developed in IGSN to figure out what they want to capture in terms of metadata for their data sets?
I don't know either. So the data template was developed slightly before my time, and so my history of my institutional knowledge of where the template came from is a little fuzzy.
In which case, because so the representatives, a very prominent representative from, the rest of the guys on the phone, Bill and Nancy both know her. From IGSN comes to our meeting, and IGSN is the International Geospatial Number, and it's primarily designed for soil samples. So they have done quite a bit of thinking in terms of the kinds of data that they feel is useful to capture for the international soil community.
Yeah, okay, I will definitely look them up and make sure that we are tied in some way with them. Fantastic, thank you.
This is Bill. I guess somewhat related to that. So all these are point sample data, right, over time. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. So the distribution format right now, I think you said, well, what is the main distribution format? Maybe I missed that.
What do you mean by that?
Well, so somebody goes to, I haven't signed on yet, so I didn't actually see how the interface that you can get access to the data. But so if somebody wants to get to the data, I noticed that there's a map of the points. So if I go to a particular point and I want to get the data over from some time 1 to time 2, what's the format or formats with which I can get the data?
So right now, if you're looking at the ISCN website, that map ties into a SQL database backend for ISCN3. And what it'll do is it will subset ISCN3 for that specific geospatial location and return either all the variables or a subset of the variables that's associated with that particular space-time point. We also have a R script that will fetch the ISCN3 and then convert it into this general data table representation. And that'll be delivered as an R data frame. I'm sorry, the website will deliver it to you as a set of Excel spreadsheets.
Okay, so that's the main format for data delivery.
Yes, for the ISCN data products, yes.
Okay. Have you looked into for example, the Open Geospatial Consortium, OGC, they have standards for time series data. Mm-hmm. So the one that we're looking at right now for NASA is time series ML to convey certain satellite data that we have among other kinds of data sets. So just wondering if you have looked into, kind of community standards for conveying time series data.
So like a NetCDF file or what is it?
Well, so the time series ML is just an XML, implementation of a abstract model of time series data. It actually began with water ML, from the hydrology community, and then right now they've generalized it to time series ML. So they took out the water specific references. So it's just something that we're looking at on the NASA side to see if it's a standard that we should be adopting for, among other things, satellite data that for certain communities who want to access our data, not so much as maps, but as time series for a given point or given grid cell.
So I can tell you that there's going to be a lot of inertia around moving away from Excel, because we've got a lot of mature soil scientists in the group who prefer the Excel interface over any of the newer optimized data file formats. So Excel is at least going to remain as an option for data downloads. Most of our temporal data is very sparse. So because this was historically built around soil surveys, going back and surveying a particular location is not very frequent, common. So I don't know if a time series it necessarily means the optimization for like a river gauge or stream gauge or something along those lines that's giving you continuous feeding measurements.
Okay, so it's both spatial and temporal.
Yes. It's more. We've got a higher spatial density than we do temporal density in the data set. We do have an observation time that's associated with each site. So it is a spatial temporal coordinate set, but it's infrequent that we get resampling of a particular location.
Okay, so if you were to plot a time series for a given point, it'll just be very irregularly populated, that time series.
Yeah, you might get 4 or 5 points for a single location. I would be surprised if you got that many.
Okay.
So it's very sparse.
Yeah. Okay.
That being said, I will take a look at that because we are talking with Neon, who has more continuous measurements. So yes, we will think about this. Thank you.
Sure. Does anybody else have any questions? If not, I have a general one. I think I mentioned this in one of my emails earlier. I don't know if has this been around so you have a sense of we were talking about like use cases of this data archive. Is it too soon to talk about somebody actually coming in and we can document what they did with what they found and kind of trace that to some use of it at the user end?
So there have been some meta-analyses with the ISCN already conducted. Luke Nave, I know, is working on one with land use and soil carbon stocks. And I have an analysis planned for next year around moisture patterns and soil carbon stocks. So I think most of those studies refer to the harmonized ISCN data product and does not to this new data pipeline, the new SOC-DRaHR pipeline, because that's brand spanking new. But there has been some use already with the ISCN data products. And we have contributions from coming in that are promised for this year from the Max Planck Institute. They've got a radiocarbon group that's standing up. They're collecting data sets around that. I should have this at the top of my head, and I don't. Oh, the CZO has the LTER has a CZO group that's looking at doing a soil synthesis led by Will Weeder that's also planning on using the SOC-DRaHR pipeline. And we have something with the coastal carbon group with the CZO, the Critical Zone Observatory Network, that's also interested in potentially using the SOC-DRaHR pipeline. So I think that the general feeling in the community is that this type of scripted versus templated data processing makes a lot of sense, especially from a reuse perspective. But it's still very sort of early stages.
So this is Brian again, and the one I don't know if you guys have taken a look at what's it called now. So it's called Cyverse, CYVERSE. It was NSF funded, maybe it still is. It used to be called iPlant, IPLANT. Now, so in terms of scripted and scripted executions of shared code, shared data, the Cyverse or iPlant, whichever you choose to call it. So those guys have been at it for 6, 7, 8 years, and they actually they did it very well. They have a active community of people sharing code, sharing workflows, and sharing data. But
Okay.
admittedly, that community started off with the more the plant developmental community.
Mm-hmm.
So you think of the people who grow plants, actually agricultural concerns. You're optimizing your development of plants for certain traits, like I don't know, bigger seeds and that kind of thing, larger yields of nitrogen, yada yada yada. So that's a community that actually has had quite a bit of experience and infrastructure. Actually. So Cyverse comes with a distributed processing platform. It comes with a front end that you can schedule, that you can sequence your jobs, that you can actually edit and create your jobs. So it's a pretty nice, comprehensive community and infrastructure that is something like 8 or 9 years old or something. I'm not entirely sure.
That sounds like we would have to have the funds to hire developers for. But I will take a look at iPlant. That's a good lead there. I think I've heard of them before, but I wasn't quite clear on what they did. So thank you.
I know it's getting time to finish up here, but there were a couple of questions about your QA/QC process and script. Can you answer that briefly, Kathy?
Most of my answers will be aspirational, but I will give it a shot.
Okay, sounds good.
So I guess briefly what I'm thinking of around the QA/QC script is establishing min-max valid values for individual measurements. So the pH example comes to mind. I know that there's something in ISCN 3 where we've got a pH of around 8,000 because someone forgot to put a decimal point in. So being able to flag those types of values quickly would be one of the features of the QA/QC script. Being able to flag sites that maybe have invalid lat long, maybe you have your study site listed as being in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and that's clearly incorrect, or you have your sampling date being around, I don't know, 2300, so that's also clearly incorrect. So very sort of basic around that. There could also be a second level of QA/QC where you're looking at distributions of values and comparing that maybe to global distributions of values. So if you've got, if your values are high on average, maybe flag that as something to watch. Flagging outliers on distributions, things along those lines. So one of the things that we're looking to stay away from for the ingest scripts is sort of almost making judgments on data. We want to just provide access to what the data provider said, and then as a researcher, you can make the decision on whether or not you want to include that piece of data in your analysis.
Oh, so the result of the QA/QC step is a separate kind of optional output that the user can use or not.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So each of the arrows here, the ingest scripts, the QA/QC, the formatting can be. I mean, clearly you have to have something to QA/QC and to format, but you could imagine turning on or off any of those scripts and just using some subsets of them.
And do you feed back the result of the QA/QC to the producer?
Yeah. Yeah, so what I would love to see is some kind of report generated when you submit a data set. So after the data is ingested, say, okay, here are the sites that you say are in this data set, and here's the distribution of that data, and here's how it compares to the rest of the data that's in SOC-DRaHR.
That'd be great. That'd be great to be able to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of my goals moving forward with the project.
So is it a couple of years? How many years do you have? Or how long do you have for the project in terms of the funding?
We are unfunded right now. This is a passion project.
Oh my! Bless your heart. Good for you. That's great.
So this is why it's taken a year to get SOC-DRaHR up to where it is right now, is because I'm doing this on my spare time.
Ah, my.
Wow. But that's impressive.
Yeah. Well, it's a good thing to get the word out, because then that's a prelude to funding then sometimes. So we'll keep our fingers crossed.
Exactly. So if you know of any funding opportunities out there, let us know.
All right, we'll definitely do that. That sounds good. Good. Well, this has been very interesting.
I'm also a postdoc right now, so if you know of any faculty positions out there, I'm on the market.
All right, that sounds good too. Okay, good. Might as well in for $1. How's it go? Anyway, penny for
in for a dollar, in for a penny, in for a
pound. That's right. Something like that. Yeah. Yeah. Great.
All right, well, I will get you a copy of all of the slides, and I'd be happy to continue any of these conversations over email.
Sounds good.
Or follow-up phone calls.
Yep.
Yeah, it's definitely is of a lot of interest to everybody here, and we definitely want to follow up with you.
Yep. So we'll do. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for giving me so much of your time.
Sure.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Yeah. See you next month.
So I'll send this recording around, Bill, and then the slides too, or not send it around necessarily. I guess put it on the wiki or something, and then get to it.
Right.
Note about.
Yeah. So I have that and the actual presentation from Kathy.
Right. Right. Okay.
Okay.
Sounds
great.
good. All right.
Okay.
Talk to you later.
See you, everybody.
Bye.